Hi, and welcome back to Dirtbike's 2020 Dual Sport Series. Now we've got them all together. We have the KTM 500 EXC, the Husqvarna FE501S, the Beta 500 RRS, the Honda CRF450L, and the SWM RS500. These bikes are the absolute elite in the dual sport world. It wasn't long ago that we didn't have bikes like this. We had to make do with 650cc street bikes that were lightly modified to go in the dirt. These are the real thing. All these are dirt capable. They're fast, they're light, they have good suspension. It really is a good time to be a dual sport fan in America. A year ago, you might recall, we did a 450 dual sport comparison. In that, we had a slightly different group of bikes, but more than anything else, these bikes have changed. Not only are they 500s, those bikes were a generation earlier, especially in the case of the KTM, the Husky, and the Beta. Last year, we did not include the SWM RS500, which was new to America that year, and now we have a returning competitor. We have the Honda CRF450L, which made a great splash last year. It is unchanged though. So here we go. Let's start going through the bikes one by one. First of all, the KTM is more or less the go-to bike in the dual sport world. That's the motorcycle that people think of when they think of hardcore dual sport riding. For 2020, it got a lot of the same modifications that the motocross bike got at the end of 2018. That means it has a smaller head, more compact motor, a more rigid frame, and all new bodywork. More than anything else, KTM has gone in and rethought the suspension. They are the same components that they had, but everything's been revalved. It's a little stiffer, it's a little more aggressive. This bike differs from the other dual sport bikes in that it is the only one with PDS rear suspension. That means there's no linkage in the rear. The shock connects directly to the swing arm, and internally it has a progressive damping system that KTM has advocated for years. Off-road guys particularly enjoy this because of the increased ground clearance. The 2020 KTM 500 EXC has undergone a moderately significant redesign, although it doesn't look that different at a glance. It got a PDS version of the stiffer frame that most KTMs and Husqvarnas got in 2019. The motors of the KTM and Husky are identical. They both got a more compact head like that of the 2018.5 factory edition. They both used a reed valve in the intake boot, and they both have the Explorer fork, which has been reworked for 2020. The KTM uses Brembo brakes and a Brembo master cylinder for the hydraulic clutch. It comes in as the lightest of the group, 244 pounds without fuel. The price, a little steep, $11,399. In 2019, the Honda CRF450L made a huge splash. This was the bike that people thought Honda should have made years and years ago. And it is an amazing bike. And this year it returns pretty much unchanged. The fork and the shock are the same Showa units that come on the MX bike, aside from the spring rates and setup. The motor has a lower compression ratio and is in a much milder state of tune with a tamper-proof EFI unit. It also uses a 6-speed gearbox, full DOT equipment, and a single-sided muffler that is ultra quiet. The headlight, blinkers, and taillight are a notch above anything else in the group. You could ride the bike at night with no trouble. The Honda is no lightweight though. On our scale, the CRF450L weighs in at 278 pounds. The Honda is the only bike in the group without oversized bars, without handguards, and without a hydraulic clutch. The price for 2020 is $10,399. Last year in our 450 shootout, the Beta 430 RRS was a big hit. It was the hands-down winner in that group. For 2020, Beta redesigned all of its dual sport bikes, but the four models, that is the 350, the 390, the 430, and the 500, all are based on basically the same platform. This year they all got a relocated crank, a different frame, and new bodywork. Many of the major components, however, are the same. The suspension at both ends is by Sachs. The frame is redesigned, although it remains the same steel construction with a central backbone, just like always. Along with the new bodywork is a new tank with 2.4 gallons of capacity. It has a hydraulic clutch, oversized bars, Nissan brakes, and Michelin tires. Plus, it comes with a Trailtech Voyager GPS. In stock trim without fuel in the tank, the base weighs 250 pounds. It sells for $10,899. Of course, the KTM sibling is Husky's big dual sport bike, which is much more closely related to the company's motocross model than is the case with the others in the group. The Husqvarna uses linkage for the rear suspension, which is a major difference between it and the KTM. It also separates itself from the KTM with an integrated subframe and airbox. It has a Magura clutch and Magura brake components, just like all of Husky's off-road bikes. However, this bike has a 6-speed gearbox and full street equipment, unlike the motocross models. It's super quiet and it passes all the proper emission tests without any intrusive and awkward charcoal canisters or smog pumps. The FE501S chassis uses the WP shock and Explorer coil spring fork. It comes in at 248 pounds without any fuel, but with both mirrors installed. It is the most expensive in the group at $11,499. The new bike in this group is the 2020 SWM RS500. You might not have heard of SWM, but you might recognize this motorcycle. It's a direct descendant of the 2006 Husqvarna TE450. That was the first of the hardcore dual sport bikes, and eventually KTM, Husqvarna, and other manufacturers took a cue from Husqvarna and started making bikes that were more off-road capable. After the KTM takeover of 2013, the old Husqvarna factory was reopened by SWM, and it started producing Italian-era Huskies under a new name. The RS500 has a modern Mikuni fuel injection system, KYB suspension, and has been beefed up in a number of ways. The bike has top-notch components like oversized bars, handguards, hydraulic clutch, and Michelin Enduro knobbies. Some of the old Husqvarna features are still there though. It still has the dual muffler exhaust system, the 6-speed gearbox, and the central backbone frame. Somewhere along the way, the SWM gained significant weight. It comes in at 285 pounds without fuel. On the plus side, the bike is actually priced about the same as it was in 2006. The SWM RS500 sells for $7,795, which is an amazing value. We took all 5 bikes to the high desert of Southern California, spent days crossing the desert, visiting famous landmarks, got to know them pretty well. All of them extremely capable off-road bikes. All of them are fun to ride, and all of them are miles ahead of what we had just a few years ago in the dual sport category. In terms of outright power, the Beta is the king. No surprise there. Even the 430 was the king of the group last year. It seems to us like Beta follows a different set of rules than everyone else. The bike is a little more noisy, and you get the feeling that it's a little less bottled up. Throttle response is crisp, and it doesn't do any of the popping or overheating that you expect from super lean EPA-approved motorcycles. Second on the list of just sheer power output has to be the SWM. It's an old school, slow revving motor that feels much bigger than the other motorcycles. It might not be as crisp and sharp down low as a modern 450 motocross bike, but it does make a lot of power. What you have to adjust to go-to with the SWM is more of an old school feel. When you roll off the gas, there's a lot of engine braking, and it doesn't seem to rev that high. The KTM and Husky are pretty much on par in terms of engine performance. They do have the same motor and they roll out of the same factory. They can't quite keep up with the two Italian bikes in a straight line, but they're super crisp and responsive and make excellent low-end power. As the revs climb on both those motors, power kind of tapers off. They are, however, ultra quiet, perhaps the most quiet in the group. The Honda has a little bit of a displacement disadvantage in this group, but it does have excellent sharp-hitting low-end power. The Honda is very close to the two Austrian bikes in performance. It might even have a touch more low-end power, and it also has a super responsive wheeling feel. On top, it tapers off, but by then it's already done a great job. The biggest complaint with the Honda motor is that it has a tendency to die. We won't say it coughs and dies or flames out like other EPA bikes have in the past. It just seems to stop running when the idle drops too low. A quick fix for this is to turn up the idle. All of these bikes have locked EFI units. That means the government doesn't want you playing with the emissions as they're certified. However, as we all know, they do get modified in the real world. If you stick just a muffler on any of these bikes in an attempt to get more horsepower, you're going to go backwards. The mapping in the EFI units, they're all designed for quiet exhaust systems. So that means it's a domino effect. You have to remap them, which often means you have to replace the whole ignition. For us, we love the quiet bikes. We love the fact that they're clean. We love the fact that people can't hear you riding where you might venture off the beaten path. Our advice? Leave them stock, leave them quiet. There's nothing wrong with the performance of any of these bikes in stock form. These 5 bikes all come with slightly different takes on what they should have for dual sport rubber. The KTM and Husqvarna actually come with Continental TKC 80 tires, which are excellent for big adventure bikes, not so good for lightweight off-road bikes. We replaced them both with STI Tech 2 tires, which are full knobs but are DOT legal. In the case of the SWM and the Beta, they come with Michelin DOT knobbies. These aren't full knobbies though, they're shortened versions that are made particularly for European off-road races. Again, on those bikes we installed STI Tech 2s. The Honda has the most street-oriented tires of all. The IRC tires that come stock on the CRF450L aren't suitable for off-road use. They're more designed for people who want to commute, get around campus, and they're also very quiet. Again, STI Tech 2 tires were the answer there. And they made it so we're comparing apples to apples with the same tires on all 5 bikes. You should also be aware that the Honda does not come with rim locks. When you put on full knobs, you have to put on rim locks as well, and then if you just put one in each wheel, you'll find the wheels are out of balance. It takes a little expertise to balance a dual sport wheel. KTM and Husqvarna give you rim locks, but they're not in the bike. You have to install them yourself. Moving on to suspension, this was the big handicap on the KTM last year. The Explorer fork was simply too soft for really hardcore off-road riding. Same thing with the Husky. Both have been upgraded significantly for 2020. Now they come in with suspension that is among the best. We still have to say they are soft, as you might expect for an off-road bike that has to cover street use, trail use, and the occasional impromptu race. Both bikes are miles ahead of what they were just a year ago. In the case of the Husqvarna, it does have linkage suspension, and that is a major difference between it and the KTM. It loses a little bit of ground clearance, and you always have to be aware when you're crossing over a log that it could hang up on that knuckle. It hangs down below the swing arm. Not so with the KTM. That's why people love the PDS rear suspension. It has a little more ground clearance, and it also has a slightly different feel that off-road riders have come to love. The Beta's big advantage in our 450 shootout last year was perhaps suspension. This year, that's been nullified somewhat by the advancement of the KTM and the Husqvarna. It is, however, still very good. It's off-road appropriate suspension and can be used for play racing and everything right up to full-on motocross, which might not be appropriate for a dual sport bike of any type. The SWM has KYB suspension front and rear. This is a huge improvement over the old school Husqvarnas of 20 years ago. In fact, some people say the SWM suspension is as good as anything in the test. The Beta, Husky, and KTM are similar in outright dirt capability. The Honda leans a little bit more toward the street, and the SWM is even more in that direction. The Honda's single greatest asset is its suspension. It's the best of the bunch, striking a very happy balance between cruise speed comfort and hard-edged performance. Weight plays a huge role in dirt performance though, and the Honda and SWM are handicapped there. They're heavy, you just can't escape that. If you have a good memory, you know the Beta 431 or 2019 450 Dual Sport Shootout. It was the most powerful and, surprisingly enough, had much better suspension than the KTM and Husky. The Beta 500 went into this test with high expectations, but KTM and Husky made big progress in the suspension department for 2020. On the trail, most of the bikes were trouble-free. We did have some problems with the Husqvarna's license plate bracket. Once you put on full knobs, it would get caught in the rear wheel, and you might lose the license plate, which is the most valuable part of a dual sport bike. The Beta's right rear blinker was right in line with the exhaust. It actually melted. You might want to relocate that before you do any off-road riding. All the bikes have large DOT legal mirrors. The Hondas, SWM, KTM, and Huskies are rigid. The Beta is the only ones that fold up at a mere touch. Sounds great, however, we have broken these mirrors because the pivot is plastic. It's not terribly durable. For night riding, the Honda, far and away the best bike. It has the brightest light, it has the easiest controls to reach, and as we said, the blinkers are going to last longer than any of the other ones in the shootout. None of these bikes have particularly large gas tanks. This is a major shortcoming. However, for the Husqvarna, KTM, and Beta, larger fuel tanks are available. And they're just now becoming available for the Honda as well. The SWM is the one oddball there. You might have a hard time finding an aftermarket tank. Either way, don't expect to get much over 100 miles out of a tank on any of these bikes in stock form. There are some things you might have to be aware of on any extended off-road ride. In the case of the SWM, don't ever leave the key on. You can run the battery down without even riding the bike. The KTM and the Husky, however, turn themselves off if you just walk away and accidentally leave the key on. On the other hand, the Beta has this excellent Trail Tech GPS system. It's called the Voyager, which is a top-of-the-line unit, and you can use it for navigation as well as speed and mileage. The Beta also has a map switch that lets you mute the power slightly when you're in really slippery conditions. On the lines of street capability, the SWM and Beta are geared taller than the other three bikes. You can go faster, longer, and in greater comfort simply because the motor isn't revving out. It's just loping along on both of those bikes. Vibration isn't a big factor on any of these bikes on the road. However, if you rev the KTM and Husky, they might vibrate the most. All these bikes are quiet. The Honda, KTM, and Husqvarna are the quietest by far, with the SWM coming slightly louder and the Beta the loudest of all. The power of these bikes is a perfect inverse of their noise level. The Beta is the horsepower king of the group, and it's the loudest. It's also geared taller than the KTM, Husky, or Honda. The SWM is closest to the Beta in power, noise, and gearing. It's clearly a powerful motorcycle and has an old school slow revving feel with a lot of engine braking. The toughest thing in choosing a dual sport bike is really evaluating who you are and what you want out of a motorcycle. The SWM, for instance, is an extremely capable bike with excellent components. It doesn't have the dirt capability of some of the others though, and if you're oriented towards street riding, it might be the best choice, mostly because it is so much less expensive than these other bikes. Next, in terms of street orientation and value, probably the Honda. It's not nearly as inexpensive as the SWM, but it's the type of bike you could ride forever and ever with very, very little maintenance. With the Honda, if you decided you wanted to do more serious dirt riding, there would be some aftermarket components that you might need to get. As we said earlier, it comes with an undersized handlebar, and a lot of the small bits and pieces on it aren't quite what you would expect in a true off-road dirt bike. On the other hand, it's extremely durable, whereas some of the other bikes have lights that might break off in a crash or even fall off on their own. The Hondas are on there to stay. This is an extremely reliable motorcycle from our experience. Then we have the Beta. The Beta is a dirt bike. It's basically what you would expect from a company like Beta, which might fly under the radar a little bit as far as EPA and carb restrictions. Just like last year, we love this motorcycle, just for its power if nothing else, but then there's also the fact that it has such top-notch components. The hydraulic clutch is flawless, the suspension is good, everything about the Beta is much, much better than you would expect out of a tiny Italian company. The choice between the KTM and Husqvarna, very difficult. They're separated by subtleties that you have to be kind of a KTM/Husky expert to really appreciate. The obvious difference, of course, is the rear suspension. Overall, though, we have to say that in outright performance, they are essentially a toss-up. Which bike did our guys choose as their favorite dual sport bike of 2020? Well, to a man, everyone came up with the KTM 500 EXC as the top bike this year, mostly because its suspension is vastly improved and the bike is pretty much ready to go once you put on better tires. We have a distinct off-road bias, of course, and not everyone feels the same way. We see as dual sport bikes as merely a legal way to connect trails. You might not think that way. If you'd like to hear more about each of these bikes, you can check out the individual videos we've done for each one. And as always, you can go to dirtbikemagazine.com for all the latest in dual sport, off-road, and motocross coverage.